As you all know, Mono Quantum is my favorite team comp in all of Honkai Star Rail. The enjoyment comes from the aesthetic and feel of the team comp. Definitely not my love for the Quantum girls. Quantum being one of the best elements allowed this team to thrive in each content the game had to offer. If this was any other element, we wouldn't be having this discussion. Now let's go back to a time where this group was deemed to be the most coped team in all of Honkai Star Rail. Post beta testing 2 of Star Rail would feature Solarwolf as a usable character, but she was much more different than the one you're all familiar with. This version of Solarwolf had less supporting capabilities and was centered around her personal damage with the Quantum Break. Not only did Solarwolf's ultimate not apply any mass defense shred to the target, but it instead gave a Quantum Entanglement, essentially making her more of a break bot and selfish character. If you think about it, alongside future Quantum characters, she'd essentially be a much better sub DPS with a break effect oriented build. And considering how consistently she can break in her respective Quantum teams, this could have went the whole 9 yards. Lastly, Solarwolf's 5-star light cone actually gave the character further selfish DPS implications, because instead of it giving a vulnerability debuff on the enemy to increase team-wide damage, it instead gave a mini Quantum Entanglement passive on the enemies with that same vulnerability debuff. It's very clear why this version of Solarwolf never made it to live, as it could scale less effective the further we went into Star Rail, and would make her a much less flexible character to use. Honkai Star Rail's 1.0 launch would only have one formulated playstyle. There wasn't much discussion around others, as other players were still getting used to the feel of the game. Now compared to Genshin Impact, Star Rail would form its various team comps and meta at a much faster rate. But in my honest opinion, it was due to those same Genshin players coming to Star Rail and not repeating their same previous mistakes. It also did help that the beta was accessible for many players before the release of the game, so we knew what to expect, or sorta. There would be some changes to various characters, not many, but enough to realize that team building wasn't going to be as linear as counting your ABCs. After this balance patch, that this game is pretty much a more so balanced and fair game overall. Okay, kick it off with Himiko. Now we did go over Himiko in the previous video, but all you really need to know for the most part is that she now has burns on all of her attacks. This character is insane now. So Sosuke Welt ultimate and talent effect is no longer a damage increase for Welt. Seele will not only be our first limited character of the Quantum element, but was also the character that pushed the Unga Bunga playstyle I was talking about earlier in the video. Being able to get an additional turn after killing an enemy meant you would stack as many buffs as possible in this damage dealer to ensure she would kill the enemy at the end of her turn. As time went on, this style of play would be known as Hyper Carry, and that would go on to remain Seele's best team for just one patch. The only competition to Seele would be Qingque, a 4-star Quantum erudition character. Qingque had a lot of damage to potentially rival that of Seele, and couple that with being a 4-star every player will receive for free, she would be an amazing replacement as the damage dealer only if good RNG was on your side. This was quite the risque character. This upcoming patch would release the pillar of the in-progress full Quantum team. Not only was this character a must-pull for anyone of the Quantum element, but she was also a staple in pretty much every team at the time of her arrival. Solarwolf would release in patch 1.1, and upon her arrival there was a few changes she brought to the overall game. You completely ignore the elemental advantages of the enemy and would have more additional damages towards that same enemy due to the mass supporting capabilities of Solarwolf. Couple this with being a nice character on the skill point economy and receiving a light cone in the same patch that kept further uptime on her debuffs. Solarwolf would be the best character at the time. Oh, and one last thing, if your allies were to equip the Genius of Brilliant Stars relic set, which gave defense ignore and further ignore the same defenses if the enemy has Quantum weakness, this would bring Seele and Qingque to another tier. The duos with Solarwolf would carry on until we were to see patch 1.3, which would feature not only the defensive option of full Quantum team. However, there is one thing you must understand about this point in time in Honkai Star Rail. While being a character that was beneficial anywhere and everywhere, there was a subset of people that believed Solarwolf was an overrated character and worse than Payload in a multitude of scenarios. To play devil's advocate, this was only true in content such as Memories of Chaos that rewards you for clearing as fast as possible, better known as zero cycling. However, this style of play was not only inaccessible for the majority of players at the time, but also downplayed the sheer comfortability and one-to-one synergy Solarwolf had with Quantum characters. She enables so much and still holds that same value even to this day. These benefits wouldn't be enough to convince those of that belief, but given with enough time, the perception of Solarwolf would age with the game. Patch 1.3 would roll around, and the first half would contain damage dealer that, much like we discussed in past videos, would make everyone and everything feel bleak in comparison. Seele and Qingque, even with the help of Solarwolf, would struggle to keep up with the massive damage output of Daniel. It's one thing to be the best in one or a few scenarios, but to be better than everyone at everything while not having your dedicated supporter it would only make sense as to why people continue to downplay the quantum team. The damage dealing had been increased exponentially. I don't blame them ultimately. It also doesn't help that the full experience of Silverwolf is not only locked behind now a light cone players can no longer redeem, and a ton of speed substats. As time went on, more players would drop Seele, ultimately resulting in less usage of her as a character, and around the same period would result in rumors of Qingque being a better character in her best team. Not only did Qingque need 4 Eidolons to reach this point, but also depended on good RNG to have better damage. Unlike Seele, if those same enemies didn't have quantum weakness, Qingque did even less damage because of Seele's built-in quantum resist penetration. So this whole discussion was situational but nevertheless blown out of proportion. In this same patch would however lie 2 defensive options, both of which with quantum typing and both having hefty staying power even in present Star Rail. Fu Xuan, a 5-star quantum preservation, would also be featured alongside Lynx, a 4-star quantum abundance. At the time, Fu Xuan would be the character most players would shift towards, as she was the first defensive option to truly dip into other paths with the utility she offered. Fu Xuan had a ton of damage mitigation for the team, making her especially good against heavy hitting enemies. Fu Xuan's utility alongside her unmatched defensive option capabilities would be a team-wide critical rate boost, free hit points, CC blockage, and personal damage depending on how she was built. Like mentioned in our recent Jing video, Fu would fit nicely into any team comp that needed a defensive option, but for the full quantum team, she would essentially be the wall for the stone pillar known as Silverwolf. Lynx was a smaller wall for the full quantum team, but ultimately a best installed teammate for damage dealers that needed more aggro. The release of these two signaled an interesting shift into Star Rail's short-term meta, but there is one thing you must understand before we continue. We technically had a full quantum team at this point in Star Rail. Fu Xuan, Lynx, alongside Silverwolf, and Seele or Qingque would ensure you had a 100% chance to land that quantum weakness on the enemy. Heck, you could even use Seele and Qingque together, replacing Lynx. It would just be rather clunky. This double defensive option full quantum team, what an oddly long name, had a lot of value in the hardest contents that Star Rail had to offer at the time, and that would be Swarm Disaster. Enemies in the simulated universe Swarm Disaster would hit extremely hard and place tons of damage over time effects onto Fu Xuan and her allies. Being Fu Xuan's biggest weakness, Lynx with her amazing cleansing on her ultimate would remove those harmful debuffs, virtually making an unkillable team that could clear this hard game mode. Sure, it wasn't the best team damage wise, but it at least had a use in contents offered to the player, and I consider that a win. As the dust would settle, most players realized this variant of Model Quantum was enough to clear their memories of Chaos endgame, but for the players that enjoy faster clears, it lacked in that department. Replacing a defensive option to the team with a Harmony character would not only result in faster clears, but also meant you could save in resources for not having to build both Lynx and Fu Xuan.
The thing is that people aren't thinking about is it doesn't have to be mono quantum in the sense that all 4 characters are mono. You just need to match one of the elements and then you don't have to worry about it.
This short-term meta shift would ultimately see Bronya as the replacement of Lynx and forming one of the best teams at the time. Furthermore, depending on the element of the enemy you were fighting would result in the typing of the Harmony character you would bring. What I like best about the Bronya variant was the damage buffs with ultimate she gave to Silverwolf and Fu Xuan, which gave us a taste of what was to come later on. This team would also show that Hypercarry would remain dominant and Mono Quantum itself was still a Hypercarry-like team. The only difference was every character in the team having the same elemental typing. Now finally, Seele could compete with the best characters at the time, as those characters also function best in hypercarry comps. 1.4 roll around, and this upcoming damage dealer not only took Seele's precious Harmony character away, but also has so much consistent damage to the point playing any other damage dealer except this one will result in the team having slower clear times and less consistency due to the change in in-game mob weaknesses. Jinglu was the best damage dealer to the release of her time. She had a ton of damage uptime, with most of it being centered around her elemental skill that consumed less of the skill point economy, was meant she functioned a lot better with Bronya than that of Seele. Jinglu also had even more damage because most of the enemies at the time had ice weakness, and she was our first real quote-unquote ice damage dealer at the time. Now, while the Quantum team never cared about what the enemies were weak to, when there were more enemies on the field and those same enemies would see a rise in hit points over time and change in elemental weaknesses, it would become a lot harder to use Seele with mid to low investment. However, these things would become more true as we go forward into Star Rail. It would also become apparent as to why there wasn't many quantum weak enemies anymore, which boils down to two things: the existence of Silverwolf, and there hasn't been any quantum damage dealer since Seele's release. The meta would slowly shift back to hypercarry format, hence why I mentioned the meta being short term, and Destruction Duo would make everything feel bleak in comparison for a very long time. The only notable releases to help combat this stale meta would be the release of Ruan Mei in XY in 1.6, Well, kind of. The thing is about Ruame, being an ice character that could help with toughness breaking may sound good on paper. Ultimately wasn't a buff to the incomplete mono quantum team, but was fun for a patch nonetheless. At the very least, Ruame gave decent damage buffs to Seele and Fushuan, and then with the added break effect and break effect efficiency gave Silverwolf even more value on a full break effect build. XY was a quantum 4-star destruction character that was featured alongside Ruame, but was ultimately a break bot and pretty much pigeonholed to teams with Ruame than that of being in the quantum team. At that point, just use Qingque instead for better results in the quantum team. 2.0 not only brought a bunch of new characters, but also brought insight into the future of Honkai Star Rail's meta. Not only would the other quirky team of Star Rail finally be complete, but Sparkle would release in the second half of the same patch. Sparkle being the 5-star Harmony character she was, would bring the full quantum team to new heights. Sparkle not only posed herself as a best in slot character for Seele and Qingque, but also gave a ton of buffs for the rest of the team as well. She shifted not only Silverwolf, but also Fushuan into a sub DPS oriented build with her team-wide damage buffs and further damage or crit buffs depending on your Lycone choice. The release of this character ultimately gave Seele and Qingque a huge boost in usage and more staying power in the meta. Mono Quantum was meta, and we can finally say that with certainty. Until the release of 2.1, that is. Acheron, our first damage dealer since the launch of 2.0, not only took the pillar of Mono Quantum away, but also the pillar of current hypercarry teams as well. Silverwolf gave Acheron the debuffs she needs to get her ultimate online, but also boosting the overall damage of Acheron. Sparkle gave the nice turn and crit damage with further damage buffs and skill points that all boosted the damage of Acheron. Acheron herself is able to break the toughness of the enemy regardless of the element of said enemy, making her the first versatile damage dealer we have received. Versatility is the philosophy of Mono Quantum, which means the exclusivity is no longer there, and Acheron herself does more damage than any other character we have seen yet. So I will leave you off with one final remark. Comfortability and versatility is the current strengths of Mono Quantum. Also, with the team being as finalized as it is, the only upgrade we'll see at this point is the replacement of the damage dealer. Considering damage numbers have ramped up for damage dealers over time, expect this to be the future of the full quantum team. Thank you for watching and have a nice rest of your day. Peace.